This is the story of how I came to have a standing appointment with a therapist. I'm sharing this story early because it felt like cornerstone content. There are times when having a therapist has helped me navigate through different avenues of life. So it's likely that in the future, I'll have stories in which I discussed such and such a thing with my therapist. Also, I feel like there's a lot of stigma surrounding mental health in general. It's gradually getting better, but it's especially noticeable around men seeking treatment for mental health. And the only way to change that is to be willing to talk about it. I'm just one voice, and I'm not the most macho guy in the world, but every voice out there helps. I've sought out therapy or counseling at 4 different times in my life, and each one has sort of informed the next. So we're going to look at each of those instances one at a time. Then I'm going to share some of the things I wish more people knew about counseling or therapy. Before I continue, I just want to say there might be a technical distinction between counseling and therapy. I don't know what that is. I'm going to more or less use those terms interchangeably here. The summer I turned 13, I became terrified of lightning. Lightning is a thing that can be dangerous, but my fear became completely irrational. I'm not going to go into the details here. I can save that for another story, but trust me when I say it didn't make any sense. Now, this fear didn't come out of nowhere. Our house had been hit by lightning that summer. A tree in our yard had been hit. I'd been in a forest preserve when a thunderstorm broke out, and it had just been a particularly stormy summer. Logically, I knew my fear was irrational, but logic goes out the window when you're having a panic attack. This fear was impacting my life and the lives of people around me. I mentioned to my mother that maybe I needed to talk to someone about it, and I think she thought it was just a phase that I would get over. Then I had an incident. When school started in the fall, I was in a new building. One day in English class, I could tell a storm was coming in, and I started to get anxious. The window was behind me, and I don't remember if I heard thunder or I saw lightning or if the anxiety just continued to build up inside me. I bolted from the classroom and ran to the bathroom where there were no windows. As much as I was embarrassed by it, I was more frightened than embarrassed. So the fear overcame my embarrassment. I have no idea what my classmates thought. I didn't care. I just needed to get out of there. I remember the superintendent trying to talk to me, and I'm not sure if I went into any details about my newfound fear of lightning. I don't really remember what I told him. The school called my mother. We had a meeting with the guidance counselor right then and there. And that was the point when my mom was like, okay, maybe we do need to see someone about this. And I don't remember a whole lot about that process. I remember I was prescribed Xanax in the event of a panic attack. And I remember thinking it wasn't insignificant for a 13-year-old to have a Xanax prescription. I don't think I saw that counselor more than once a month. I'm thinking she must have been a psychiatrist if she could prescribe drugs, but I'm not sure. I'm not even sure I saw that counselor more than 6 times. I don't have a great memory of it. This was almost 30 years ago. What I do know is I eventually got over my fear of lightning. There was no moment where I was suddenly cured, but through small, consistent efforts, learning different coping skills, I now enjoy watching thunderstorms from my back porch. This one was kind of a big deal, so it's going to get the most attention. I didn't enjoy high school much, and it's not that I never had a good time or I don't have any fond memories. It just wasn't something in general that was enjoyable for me. And I hoped college would be kind of a fresh start, and in some ways it was at first. Eventually, the malaise I knew in high school found me again, and it became amplified. For a long time, I attributed it to my circumstances. I had difficulties with roommates. I had frustrations with coursework. I was living away from home for the first time. And I just thought it was that combination of things just kind of going wrong and bugging me. During my sophomore and junior year of college, it was the worst. And now, being more than 20 years removed from it, it's difficult to articulate what that feeling was like. The best way I can describe it is it was kind of like when you have a really bad day because a lot of little things go wrong. So imagine your tire goes flat, you're late for work, your boss yells at you, you drop your phone in the toilet, you go home to find your refrigerator is broken and your food is bad. That's a monumentally bad day. It felt like I couldn't win, like I was never going to win. And it felt that way all the time. And so I just kind of started to give up. I would just stay in bed and not go to classes. I would rarely go to social functions. And if I did go, I would leave early without saying anything to anyone. And on top of all of this, these things, this feeling made me feel guilty and scared. Scared because if I couldn't handle the real world as a college student with 12 whole credit hours, how was I going to handle it after college when I had to have a 40-hour work week job? And guilty because in the global sense, things were pretty good. I had a roof over my head, I was well fed, all my basic needs were being met. So what right did I have to feel so sad when so many other people were so much worse off? Eventually, I enlisted the help of the university's health department and sought out some counseling. I don't remember who or what pointed me in that direction, but fortunately for me, it was practically free. And if you're a student at a college or university, you'll often find this is the case. I think I had to pay $5 a session. I feel like for some reason that was largely symbolic, or maybe it satisfied some legal requirement. I don't exactly remember. Part of the problem with the free university counseling is that you kind of get what you pay for. Your free or nearly free counselor is likely a graduate student. That doesn't necessarily make them bad, but I often found that just as I was starting to make progress, I would have to switch counselors because that individual was moving along to the next step of their program. What was good about this in terms of a learning situation was that I discovered that I just clicked it differently with some counselors or therapists. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation. And I wish I had a little more insight into what that process looks like of finding someone that clicks with you, but I think there's just some trial and error involved. I had one counselor who was religious, and I had previously shared that I grew up going to church. So she would often encourage me to attend church social functions. And I had to say, I don't want to go to church. I'm not sad because I'm not attending church. And I don't have a problem with people being religious or with faith-based counseling if that's what you want, but that's not what I wanted or needed in that situation. Eventually, I'd gone through enough counseling that I was given some sort of diagnosis. I don't recall exactly, but it was something along the lines of general depressive disorder. And I was told that I had basically been dealing with depression through most of high school. That kind of made sense to me given how I navigated those 4 years. I did not go to school dances. I only went to basketball games as it was required for pep band. I was only in band because my parents bought me a trumpet my freshman year and I felt like I couldn't quit. And I had friends early on, but they went to different schools or they were enrolled in different classes later on. So through much of my high school career, I felt like I didn't have a best friend or really good friends. I had people who let me sit at their lunch table. The only thing I enjoyed was someone had talked me into joining Academic Bowl my senior year, and I really enjoyed that even though practice was early before the school days started. I remember at one point realizing that I could graduate early and do high school in 3 years instead of 4, and my parents didn't like that. It wasn't even a discussion. I think they thought that it was important for my social development to attend all 4 years and go to those social functions, but it didn't really matter because I still avoided all those functions unless they were outright mandatory. So there was that realization. I was depressed, and I had been for years. And I feel like some people welcome a diagnosis because it offers an explanation, and others dread it because they take that to mean there is something wrong with them. And I kind of felt a little bit of both. That feeling was further complicated when it was suggested that I start taking antidepressants. I politely declined at first. I wasn't comfortable. I wasn't sure how I felt about it, but eventually I decided to give it a try. Counseling had helped a lot, but I didn't feel like it took me all the way to where I needed to be functioning as a normal person. I started on a low dose of Lexapro right before a family vacation to Colorado. It felt like a big secret that I was keeping from everyone, but I did find it helpful. It's worth noting that everyone can respond differently to different medications, and this is by no means me saying that you should be on medication if you feel depressed. That's a personal decision you have to make with your therapist and a psychiatrist. This is just what I did. I don't think I was on the medication very long. It was maybe a month or two. And it didn't make me happy or super content. It just gave me that extra little push when I felt like staying in bed all day. After a short course of that medication, I had one follow-up with a psychiatrist, and then I was done with medication and counseling for several years. The thing with depression is that it doesn't completely go away, but you learn to recognize it when it comes around and how to cope with it later. The other thing about it is sometimes it presents as anxiety later, which feels like a new and different thing. At any rate, by the time I graduated college and I was done with that round of counseling, I felt much better than I had felt the 8 years prior. The third instance was the least remarkable. I'd been out of college about 10 years. I was living alone in a house that I'd just bought. I was working a full-time job. I was on third shift and I hated it so much. But it paid the bills. My needs, basic needs, were still being met. And I don't recall how long I'd been feeling down. But at some point I remember thinking to myself, man, I haven't had these kinds of depressive thoughts and feelings since I was in college. Now I have the benefit of having a good friend from college who went on to get his master's degree in psychology with the intent of being a counselor. He did it for a while, decided it wasn't for him, but he still has that knowledge and experience. So sometimes I will just lean on him and say, what do you think about this? So I called him up, and I believe he said something to the effect of, yeah, everyone kind of needs a tune-up now and then. And this was now about 10 years out of college, give or take. As I mentioned earlier, I just bought a house. It was kind of expensive. It's a considerable thing to budget and save for. So I was worried about the cost of therapy. What I did was I found a place that would let me pay on a sliding scale. The therapist I was set up with was a little older, and she had mentioned early on that she was planning to retire soon. So in a lot of ways, it felt like she had a foot out the door already. At one point, I was telling her about my frustrations around building a bass guitar. She didn't understand why it was important for me to have a bass guitar. And it's okay that she doesn't have the values that I do, but I thought she should have enough empathy to know that having a working bass guitar was a value of mine, whether it made sense to her or not. I saw her maybe 3 or 4 times, and that was it. I kind of decided that we weren't a great fit, but I'd also vented enough during those sessions that I felt like a lot of my depressive thoughts started to fade. The fourth and final instance is the situation I find myself in now. I have had a standing appointment with my current therapist since February 2019. This started about 4 to 5 years after the third instance, but unlike that instance where there wasn't anything particular, this time there was a clear and present reason. In October 2018, my mother passed away. She was just 55 and had brain cancer. She was first diagnosed in 2015, and when you're in this situation, you're always kind of hoping for some miracle or thinking there will be more time. But regardless, no one expects their mother to die at 55. And I knew within 2 to 4 weeks of her passing that it was going to stir some things up, and I was going to need help with that. Obviously, I wasn't the only one feeling her loss in the family, but no one else in the family is a certified counselor or therapist. They don't have the tools. Like, they could hear me and we could hear each other. But I also feel like there is some value in talking to a unbiased third party, if that makes sense. The thing with all of these instances is that the hardest part is admitting you need help with something. It could be depression, it could be grief, it could be a lifetime of bad habits brought on by a childhood trauma. Whatever it is, identifying it and saying, this is a problem, is hard. The next hard part is deciding to actually do something about it. You're going to come up with excuses. You're going to say, I don't have time, I don't have money, it's not that important, but it is that important. I feel like the thing is, we avoid emotions and feelings that are uncomfortable, and we ignore them or we stuff them deep inside. And you could do that. I'm sure some people do it their whole lives. I feel better for having gained this knowledge or techniques that I've learned through going to therapy. And I feel like this is important to know. Whatever the thing is, it is not going to go away until you address it. And you are going to feel so much better when you do. In addition to addressing the grief over losing my mother, I've discussed a wide variety of things with my therapist. How things are going at work, how things are going with my family, whether or not I should get another motorcycle. Incidentally, if you're one of these motorcycle guys who says, you never see a motorcycle parked outside a therapist's office, I have totally driven my motorcycle to my therapist's office. I am fortunate enough that my therapist is covered in part by my insurance, and knowing the value of getting therapy, I've made sure it's covered anytime I have to select a new plan. If you think you might benefit from having sessions with a therapist, I highly encourage you to look into it. There are options in person. There are options online. There are facilities that will charge on a sliding scale based on your income. In lieu of a therapist, I'm always a fan of, just talking things out with a friend. Just be aware that your friend might not have the qualifications of a therapist, obviously. And I think you also need to be intentional with your request and say, I have a thing that's bothering me. I would like to talk about it. That might sound stupid or a little on the nose, but I definitely do this, especially with my friend who has some of this experience and knowledge. I called him up 2 or 3 weeks ago and said, hey, this thing happened. I'm really bothered about it. If you have time, I'd like to talk about it. Just don't go and abuse your friendship with people. Friendship should be a give and take kind of thing. So be there and willing to listen to them too. But I do recommend a therapist if you can find a way to make it happen. Unfortunately, I feel like there's still a lot of stigma around mental health. If you watch television or movies, you'll often see the protagonists discuss the idea of someone getting therapy as a character flaw instead of being an empowering act. Until now, I've only shared this fact about myself with a few trusted friends and family members. There have been a couple of times when I've shared it with coworkers. I'm sure there are people who will watch this and think of me as a lesser person because I've chosen to get counseling for things. Those people are not good people, and they are not worth my time. They shouldn't be worth your time either. One thing I've learned is that a large portion of the population are just children in adult bodies. They haven't sat down with any uncomfortable thoughts long enough to develop any kind of real emotional maturity. And you've probably seen this in, say, a coworker who's throwing a tantrum when things didn't work their way in the workplace. You've absolutely seen this if you've ever worked customer service. The other important takeaway is you don't have to have experienced some heavy trauma or be on the verge of suicide in order to get help. The first time I got help, it was because I was afraid of lightning, and it was impacting my life and the lives of people around me. The second time, I couldn't articulate the problem. I just knew I was unhappy most of the time. So I waited for years to address it because it didn't affect anyone except me. And I just felt like I could just continue to suck it up. But when I finally went through it and got some help, my only regret was that I didn't do it much sooner. And if it hadn't been for those experiences, I don't know that I would have had the foresight to say, I need to talk to someone about this when my mother died. If you're thinking about therapy or counseling, please look into it. Find a way to make that call. It's not something you have to commit to forever. You don't even have to see the first counselor you meet more than once. If they're not a fit, find someone else. And that's pretty much the story of how I came to have a standing appointment with a therapist. Please feel encouraged to share this with anyone who might need to hear it. I'll entertain further questions on the subject as I have time. As always, thank you for tuning in. You get the car, I'll get the night off. Cheers.